Welcome to BFNC Living, where community, culture, and empowerment come together. I'm your host, Chandra Redfern, and this program is dedicated to keeping you in the know about the stories, initiatives, opportunities, and voices shaping our future. Thank you for joining us. Let's talk about life. Welcome to BFNC Living, where we keep you in the know about what's going on in community so that you may be better equipped to deal with life issues. I'm your host, Chandra Redfern, CEO of the Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers. And we know that March is Women's History Month, but we also know that, a lot of women are caregivers, right, amongst many things. And so, I myself have been in that boat and still am a caregiver in some way. And I remember reading statistics that said approximately 38 million Americans are caregivers. And that really just kind of it just stood out to me. And I think there are so many people that are in this role that we don't know about, and there's so much that goes on. When you are a caregiver. And so I thought today we would just have a conversation with someone who is not only a professional in the mental health realm and an event planner and has done so many different things, but also has and is been in the role of caregiver. And so I'd like to welcome Sarah Taylor to the studio on this morning. Thank you for being able to join us, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me, and not just having me, but the timeliness of Women's History Month and some personal things going on around caregiving. So,
Right,
this is definitely timely for me and a topic that I'm very passionate about on so many different levels.
right. And as an aside, I would like to say this is a podcast, so the viewers will not be able to hear you, but they may see our reels, and your hair looks beautiful. I would like to say so. Um, so just for our listeners, if you could just share a little bit about your caregiving story and how you found yourself in that role.
Um, I'll start with, my parental caregiving responsibility in 2009 when I had my niece living with me, and she had an infant that she was not able to care for. And so I was asked to help out. At that time, I had one biological child that was raised and gone away to college and gone. And so, caring for a 11-month-old was, different, because I was also a vice president of a nonprofit at that time. So I had a C-suite position, um and caring for an 11-month-old was not in my, plan, let's just say, was not in my plan, but given all the circumstances surrounding that, I was not going to see, my loved one, in the system, because many children, that have parents in the similar circumstance not able to take care of them for various reasons. And so my caregiving journey started over again in 2009. And along that way, because it was a little one that had unique needs, and it when you say the question about finding yourself, so much of you is into the caregiving. It is in the
Mm,
caregiving role that is prioritized over everything. So often finding yourself may happen when there's a crisis or something that happens health wise to you, whether it's stress. Because when we are in that caregiving role, we are not the priority. Societal norms were not the priority. However, organizations like Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers are shifting that mindset that we have been taught about caregiver, we prioritize our loved one. That's what we do. And we lose ourselves. I don't care what anyone says. I think it's changing. That norm and that belief is changing now. Thankful to organizations like yourself, but you will lose yourself in that desire to prioritize your family member.
And that's a good point. So I want to stop you there. You said so much. I mean, one of the things you said was that, you know, at your start of your newest caregiving journey back in 2009, the thought process is you weren't going to let a loved one go into the system. And I think that resonates so much um in our community, right? Like I think we're reared that you take care of family um, no matter what. And we see so many times people taking care of loved ones, young loved ones, older loved ones, right? Regardless if you're financially able to, but because this has been instilled, right? Because you don't want them to go in the system. And there's a lot of reasons why, right? But then you start talking, you spoke about self-care and how caregiving becomes your identity really, and that you lose pieces of yourself. You may neglect, things like um I've heard caregivers neglect getting their annual physicals, right? Just something that normally you might do, and it's just like, "Oh, I can't because I got appointments for this one, appointments for that one." And I think that's a very important place to be, especially as women, because it is Women's History Month, that we are sometimes so often taking care of everybody and everything else that we're the last people we take care of ourselves. And when we do, sometimes, and I want to ask you your thoughts about this, we feel guilty about it. Like we feel
Yeah.
guilty about taking that time to just breathe or decompress and things like that. And so I want to get your thoughts about that and find out if you have dealt with that. And then if you have, what are some things or strategies that you've taken on to help you regroup and really pay attention to Sarah and the care that Sarah needs and what Sarah may need in order to be a caregiver.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is so important to recognize that when we talk about caregiver burnout, how do we begin to have conversations when someone becomes a caregiver or just regular general conversations about supporting caregivers. Because the reality is that I did not, when the case came to my mother and my sister being the primary caregiver and us needing to relieve her to go to Pittsburgh to give her a respite. Because the reality, Chandra, is that most of us that are in the caregiving role also have another full-time job on top of being a caregiver. And so not feeling guilty about leaving your loved ones with caregivers, having to have those cameras in the house,
Mm,
having to, have these conversations with aides that may or may not show up, having to have a backup, having to pay folk um, out of the pocket in addition to what insurances may or may not do. But unfortunately, it really when the caregiving related to my mother as well as myself as a parent caring for a child with unique needs, it really unfortunately took for me to get a wake up when my blood pressure start getting higher and
mm,
higher and higher. And similar to my sister taking care of my mom, it shouldn't have took a health challenge to slow us down and to remind us how important, when you're talking about caregiving and we're taught to take care of our families, as you said, we don't put our parents in nursing homes and we will work around a shift to make sure it happened, get neighbors to come in, whether they're qualified or not. We do what we need to do to keep our families home. And at often we suffer. we suffer and don't prioritize self. And we had to get to the point with my sister where we said, you know what? We're going to take shifts. We're
Mm,
going to come each take a shift a weekend because it was our responsibility to take care of our mother on the weekend. She had caregiving Monday through Friday, but on the weekend, it was the family's responsibility. We had to give my sister a break. She wouldn't take it, but we could tell agitation and health challenges going on with her, and even myself feeling guilty about taking a vacation.
mm, yeah,
Feeling guilty about taking a vacation, and not calling when I'm on vacation or scheduling check-ins when you're on vacation. You have to get to the point where you realize if you are not well, whether it's frustrating when you're caring for a loved one and it may not seem that
right.
your frustration is being exhibited in your care, but somewhere along the way it is, and recognizing that you need a break before it's too late.
That's so important. I remember the first time I was doing caregiving with my grandmother, and I remember when she passed away, and I think we had a vacation plan, and it was like planned, I think a week after she died or something like that. And we had this vacation planned, and I was so apprehensive about it. We were going out of the country, and I was just like, well, I needed to have a long distance plan on my phone. I needed, because, anything. And she ended up being in a facility because medically she needed that. But I remember she ended up passing prior to that. But I think that was the first real vacation I took in 9 years.
Mm,
And it was just like a big exhale moment, and I think that so many caregivers deal with that, and what I can appreciate is that you said your sister was the primary caregiver because your mom was in Pittsburgh, so, you know but you all as a family recognized we need to go and give her a break, and there are so many that are on this caregiver journey that do not have that support of someone being able to give them a break, and that's what I love about, our caregiver clubhouse, our program here at BFNC that, we've had for the past 3 years, and we are relaunching a new fashion, have some great stuff coming up, but that, we don't do long-term respite, but at least for 4 hours, someone can bring their older adult and they can engage in activities, and that caregiver can go if they just wanna go in their car and have an ice cream cone. That was always my thing, to sit in my car and have an ice cream cone, right? But whatever it is they want to do, because that is so important to just be able to breathe and know that your loved one is taken care of, right? And that they're people that are trained and know, right? Because that's the other
mhm,
thing, even when it's family, if there are complex medical issues or something, you gotta like train the family, like, like I remember saying, no, 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 this is what, because they would go and see her and they would, people think also like, no, this is what the deal is, this is what's going on. But a relief it is because it emotionally and mentally takes a toll. And I think, you talked about you got high blood pressure, but the thing about it was the stress of your regular life, right? Because you have a child, you are working, and then you have now your mother that's become sick. It's the stress of it that starts to eat away, and then that stress shows up in physical form as high blood pressure, or because we're not watching what we put in our mouth, high cholesterol, or, all kinds of other things, fatigue, right? We're not sleeping and depression. But it starts to take an emotional toll on you. So what would you say was the most emotionally challenging part, or is the most emotionally, because you're still a caregiver, the most emotionally challenging part of being a caregiver?
I really For me, I think not transferring your frustration
Mhm.
on that loved one. And being honest about it. If you're tired, you're frustrated, because whether it's a child or an older adult, they may be setting their ways. They may say some harmful things to you in that caregiving. There could be dementia. So, really not personalizing the things and really being honest with yourself if you are angry. If you're frustrated, you got to be honest with yourself when you're at that a point of frustration.
Yeah. I like that point because, again, if you go into like, I'm not going to put my loved one in the system, I'm going to take care of it. And one of the things I recognize is that when you're a caregiver, everybody asks about the person you're taking care of, right? How's mom? How's dad? How's this and that? But rarely, and I in the past, before being a caregiver, I was guilty. Does someone say, "How are you?" You know, what's going on with you? Because there is stuff going on with you, right? And then you also need to have, and I don't know if you've experienced this, the the vulnerability, but also have um a safe place where you can just be transparent in how you're feeling, right? Because you get angry, you get frustrated, and not necessarily with that person you're caregiving, although it could be with that person. Because sometimes, I remember dealing with my grandmother, and she's like, "I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that," and I'm thinking, if you would just do that, it would make everything so simple. But she was adamant, she would dig her, and I get it. She only had control of so much. So she wanted to hang on to the control she had. And I'm on the
Mhm.
side like, lady, but being able to express to someone like, I'm really frustrated, and that's a very hard thing I've found when I talk to caregivers to do. And I think that's why it's so important that um there are supports, or that people have good supports to be able to talk through this, like, to just say, "I'm just tired," you
Yeah.
know?
And think about it. Outside of your model, and again, when we're talking urban, low income communities, where do you see caregiver support groups, caregiver outreach, caregiver welcoming care? You don't
Yeah.
typically. Outside of your model, you don't. Normally, and again, I think it goes back to often, and I could only speak from my lived experience as a woman of color, the superhero, superwoman syndrome, that we can do this, and that from a societal perspective, once we take on that responsibility, they're expecting us to do it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And they're expecting this superwoman syndrome. I got it. I can do it. And we're the last ones taking care of ourselves. And then when we're no longer well, who's going to care for our loved one?
Exactly, right? I mean, the thing that, I continue to learn is that I have to take care of me in order to take care of everybody else, right? And I think that helps me deal with feeling sometimes guilty, right? And taking those breaks and kind of saying like, no, I need to do something for myself, or that type of thing, because you have to do something for you. You have to learn how to establish boundaries and whatever little routine you can. You have to be able to do those things. Um and you made a really valid point about, having supports, and the model that we have here, which I think is a really great model. Because the reality is that I never really had heard of caregiver. Like, it wasn't something in my circle, in our community, that was really talked about. Like, caregiver support, like, what do you need? What do you mean caregiver support? That's what you're supposed to do. And I get it. And I am so appreciative for my time being able to be a caregiver to my grandmother, and then for a short period to my father. Um, because it helped me, and that's another question that I'm going to ask you before we wrap up. Um, but I recognized there were so few supports. I mean, when it came down to things, like a lot of times people don't know they are put into being a caregiver unexpectedly, and they don't know the financial situation of their loved one. You know, nobody knows where the papers are for anything. Nobody knows what mom hides her checkbook or, anything like that. And so you are in this place of trying to figure this stuff out. And even, here I am, an educated person, I work in the field, but even for me, I'm like, wait, I found myself, and at least I think God that I had the access to the supports, right? So I knew where to go, and I could call people and say, "This is what's going on. What do I do?" But there are so many people that don't have that support, right? And they don't know the system. And quite frankly, the system can be very frustrating. It was frustrating for me knowing it. And so I can only imagine how it could be for someone who doesn't know it. But we have to have these supports in our community. You know, we have to talk about that. Yes, we could do so many great things as women and as Black women, but we don't have to do it alone. And so you do need those supports. So if you're caring for mom, you're caring for grandma, you're caring for auntie, you're caring for the neighbor, because that's how we work as community. We care
Absolutely.
for people in need. Like, there are places where you can get some support. There are places where you can get help. Try to figure it out. You can get some advocacy, things like that. And that's really one of the things that we at BFNC try to be to people is a good neighbor. I always say, like, it sounds really cliche, but yeah, we're trying to be a good neighbor. If something's going on in your life and back in the day, it was the neighbors, right? That helped you out and told you, well, go do this or go do that. And that's what we're trying to do for people, because there's a lot that goes on in our community that we don't talk about for a lot of different reasons. And we really should. And so, what is one thing that you wish other people understood about caregivers that they don't understand?
Um, particularly I'll look at 2 lenses and I think it's similarities. Particularly, we just do not do a good job with helping caregivers that are raising children with disabilities.
Mhm.
That's a whole nother, whether we're talking about an adult aging family member with a chronic health condition, or rather we're talking about a child with a disability. And I can't tell you the level on both ends, the level of shame and guilt that often comes depending on the circumstances, depending on um, when, what circumstances, as a parent raising a child with unique challenges and a disability, the level of shame and blame around certain behaviors, certain circumstances, whether it was leaving my mom in the hospital where we couldn't stay around the clock, the guilt, because we know with the workforce shortage, we know with not a lot of, I don't want to say with the pipeline,
Right.
a lot of new millennials coming in with different views and values as it relates to certain professions like CNAs, home health aides. And so that level of guilt when we could not be there. So I think for me, I think on both ends, shame, guilt, and often blame, that is not talked about. We need support circles. We need groups with therapists in it helping us process our feelings. There has to be, there's again, shame, blame, guilt that often
Mm,
is layered for different circumstances.
wow. Yeah, that's so true. Shame, blame, and guilt. And that is something that people need to be aware of. And so before, it's one thing when you're looking from the outside in, right? But understand there's a lot of emotions going on behind what you see. And I believe that's why we all need a little bit of grace and a little bit of mercy,
Hmm.
to extend that to someone, because It's one thing to be like, well, why do they take their kid here, or why are they doing this with but you don't know the story behind it, right? And so just giving a caregiver the benefit of the doubt that they made the decision based on feeling it was the best decision to make for the one that they're caring for, and it was the best decision to make for themselves. So we're running down on time, but I have two questions.
Okay.
Um, two final questions. And the first one is, what keeps you hopeful?
I think when I look at my loved ones, seeing that smile on their face, knowing that whatever the circumstance may be, for the condition, I wanna be clear, for the condition, that one moment, that one smile, when I would walk in, to Pittsburgh and my mom even towards the end would say, "Sarah, you're here." That smile, hearing her say my name, and even with my daughter, the moments where we can, think about, have conversations about her working and wanting to have a job and thinking about those happy moments and seeing the smile on her face for me outweighs any challenges, or hard, as I often say, pain points that we may have experienced, those pain points.
And so, as we close, what is one message that you would want every caregiver that's listening to this podcast to hear?
Don't suffer silently, because it will blow up at some point. It will take you, you may be on edge, it will take you at some point over the edge. So there are opportunities for you to get help. Reach out. There are organizations like your organizations, non-judgmental, that understands from that cultural lens, that understands from that system practice lens. You serve many individuals from multicultural backgrounds, ethnicities, that understands it, but don't suffer silently. Don't try to feel like you have to do it all yourselves. Get support for you and take a moment, even if it's 5 minutes, to pick up a phone and call a hotline to prioritize you. Don't suffer silently.
Wow, wow, it's a great message for our listening caregivers, and we are here to learn more about BFNC services. You can visit us at www.bfnc.org or give us a call at 716-852-5065. As I said, we have a caregiver clubhouse. So, we have activities for the caregivers. So we know sometimes it's hard, to get out and do things. We have information sessions. We have a lot of things because we want to provide support for our caregivers. So please reach out. We are looking to expand our caregiver clubhouse. We're going to be opening up 5 days a week instead of the three. So we're looking forward to that. Thanks to our friends at the Ralph Wilson Foundation who believe in the work that we do. And so we're just looking forward to being able to support our community and to become stronger together. Sarah, I appreciate so much your transparency, your trusting me with by sharing your story, and wish you nothing but the very best. And so, thank you so much. Um, and to listen to this podcast, you can tune in to WUFO online. You can listen to the podcast or check us out at www.bfnc.org under our podcast, where you can listen to this podcast and previous episodes. So, until next time, um, take care.
Thank you.